Imagine the largest naval, air and land operation in history. Imagine a day that marked the beginning of the end of World War II. That day was June 6, 1944. That day was D-Day. Today we take you back to those chilling hours, to the beaches of Normandy, to the heart of Operation Overlord. We remember the courage, the sacrifice, and the triumph of the human spirit. World War II has been raging for 5 years. Northwestern France is under Nazi occupation. And the Allies, the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom and other countries are planning a major offensive, an offensive that would start with D-Day.
Units of the 1st British and the U.S. 82nd Airborne Divisions. Almost a year before this operation, a troop carrier group transported a parachute infantry battalion from England to start the invasion of North Africa. But the invasion of Sicily was the first real test.
The D in D-Day stands simply for day, a term used to describe the first day of any large military operation. The planning was detailed and meticulous.
But before the D-Day, there must be a number of lesser D-Days. The first large-scale airborne operation was performed in conjunction with the assault on Sicily, 10 July 1943.
Lieutenant General Frederick Morgan and his team of British, American and Canadian officers submitted plans for the invasion in July 1943. D-Day, June 6, 1944, marked the start of Operation Overlord. Early that morning, Allied airborne forces parachuted into drop zones across northern France, and over 5,000 ships and landing craft were used to land more than 150,000 troops on 5 beaches in Normandy. The beaches were codenamed Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. The challenges of mounting a successful landing were daunting. The English Channel was notorious for its rough seas and unpredictable weather. The enemy had spent months constructing the Atlantic Wall, a 2,400-mile line of obstacles.
A wall of fortifications stretched along the entire coast of Europe. Part of the plan called for our air forces to carry an army of paratroops and airborne infantry over this wall.
Many of the landing craft were swamped by high waves, drowning most of their men. Soldiers charged forward in chest-deep waters, weighed down by as much as 90 US pounds, or 40 kilograms of ammunition and equipment. As they came ashore, they faced withering machine gun, artillery, and mortar fire. In the opening minutes of battle, by one estimate, 90% of the frontline men in some companies were killed or wounded.
Many men had to discard their weapons and equipment to save themselves from drowning. Casualties in the first hour were heavy.
In the months and weeks before D-Day, the Allies carried out a massive deception operation intended to make the Germans think the main invasion target was Pas-de-Calais, the narrowest point between Britain and France, rather than Normandy. Many tactics were used to carry out the deception, including fake equipment, a phantom army commanded by George Patton and supposedly based in England across from Pas-de-Calais, double agents, and fraudulent radio transmissions. On June 6, 1944, more than 150,000 American, British and Canadian troops stormed 50 miles of Normandy's fiercely defended beaches in northern France. This day marked the start of Operation Overlord, the largest amphibious invasion in history. The operation began with thousands of paratroopers landing inland on the Utah and Sword beaches in an attempt to cut off exits and destroy bridges to slow Nazi reinforcements. The Allies faced formidable German defenses. Anticipating an Allied invasion, Adolf Hitler had put Erwin Rommel in charge of spearheading defense operations in the region. Hitler charged Rommel with finishing the Atlantic Wall, a 2,400-mile fortification of bunkers, landmines, and beach and water obstacles. Despite these defenses, the Allies managed to land over 150,000 soldiers on the beaches of Normandy by the end of the day. The English Channel was notorious for its rough seas and unpredictable weather. Stormy seas made the landings incredibly difficult, with many regiments coming ashore far from their target destinations. Many of the first troops to arrive at Normandy were accidentally dropped off by their landing boats in water that was too deep. This caused many of them to sink under the weight of their guns and equipment. Also, not a good start were the flat bottoms on the smaller boats, which bounced across the waves, causing seasickness among the troops. The task of guiding the landing forces in with signal lights fell to midget submarines. These craft were the first Allied warships to arrive on station on the morning of June 6, 1944. With the main strength of US naval forces committed to the Pacific, the task of protecting the vast assemblage of invasion ships fell primarily to the Royal Navy and Royal Canadian Navy.
The British fired at fortified houses as they came in, smashing many a sniper's nest and observation post. In one American sector, fire from enemy pillboxes kept many of our men pinned against the shore cliffs. Our casualties were high. In the British sector, special duty engineers hit the beach first, with the medics and infantry following.
These challenges made the D-Day invasion a very complex and risky operation. Despite these difficulties, the Allies managed to land over 150,000 soldiers on the beaches of Normandy by the end of the day. However, with their success, the invasion was costly for the Allies. It is estimated that they suffered 10,000 total casualties on D-Day itself, with 4,414 confirmed dead. The first waves of American fighters were cut down in droves by German machine gun fire as they scrambled across the mine-riddled beach. At Omaha Beach, US forces persisted through the day-long slog, pushing forward to a fortified seawall and then up steep bluffs to take out the Nazi artillery posts by nightfall. By the end of the day, the Allies had established a foothold along the coast and could begin their advance into France. Within a few days, about 326,000 troops, more than 50,000 vehicles, and some 100,000 tons of equipment had landed. By August 1944, all of northern France had been liberated. The successful execution of D-Day put the Allies on a decisive path toward victory. Less than a year after the invasion, the Allies formally accepted Nazi Germany's surrender.
The first German soldiers captured in France wait until someone has time to evacuate them.
Women played significant roles in D-Day and the broader context of World War II, often working behind the scenes in critical capacities. Here are some ways women contributed. Many women Air Force service pilots risked their lives on June 6, 1944. They flew aircraft from factories to military bases, towed targets for live anti-aircraft artillery practice, and transported cargo.
This is Texas, cradle of our Army's Air Force. This is an AAF field, too. But over headquarters rides a strange little girl gremlin called Fifinella. And out of those buses are stepping girls. Girls who give a new angle to an Air Force story. They're WASPs, Women's Air Force Service Pilots. But even before they get a chance to take the polish off their nails, it's out onto a dusty Texas drill field with them. Right away, the Air Force wants to get a little muscle on those pretty arms. Very simply and seriously, the WASPs, girls like Mary Abbott, maybe a little younger, maybe older, are willing to plow into as rugged a 6-month stretch as anything handed to women in the whole war effort. Map reading and physics, navigation and code, with strict AAF exams in each, too. For men, it would be tough. It's tough for girls, too. To be accepted as a WASP, each girl had to have 35 hours in the air beforehand. enough to know men's airplane talk when they hear it. But flying here is different, Kay. The instrument board of that Link trainer has instruments and radio devices and controls you never dreamed of. This is the Army, Kay.
Women assumed various roles, including nurses, spies, code breakers, and journalists. Their work was pivotal to the war effort and the success of operations like D-Day.
There they go, Lonnie and Nancy, the two of them. Two girls of a large and important sorority, all of them just as determined to be good flyers, just as sincere. Someday, not so far away, in a month or so, this trainer will be a P-47 or a P-38, being ferried from factory to field, from one field to another, with Lonnie or Nancy or Jean or Peggy or Barbara at the stick.
Women's Special Operations Executive Agents played a significant role in preparing for the D-Day landings.
Nobody should ever tell a WASP that flying's not a woman's job. They wouldn't believe it, any more than if it were said a girl can't be a good flyer and a woman at the same time.
They were not just secretaries or messengers, but agents and double agents, risking their lives to help make the Allied invasion a success.
When she gets time for relaxation in the sun, they go up to receive their wings from the top woman pilot of them all, the founder of the WASPs, Miss Jacqueline Cochran. Each WASP, like other women in other services, has achieved no little thing. She's gone into a man's world because the men needed her, gone through a tough ordeal as just a girl, and come out a girl pilot with the U.S. Army Air Force.
They were trained alongside their male counterparts, taught weaponry and weaponless combat, orienteering and wireless operations.
Needed for ferrying duty, so that the men trained and training can go off to fight, while WASPs help get their ships started on the road overseas. There is a reason for the WASPs. You did your part. Keep them flying, Fibonella.
Women were also part of the French resistance, acting as couriers and performing other key tasks. Their low visibility in French society played to their advantage under occupation. It meant they could act without arousing suspicion. More than 6 million women took wartime jobs in factories, 3 million volunteered with the Red Cross, and over 200,000 served in the military. Women were conscripted in December 1941 and given a choice of working in industry or joining one of the auxiliary services. The Auxiliary Territorial Service, the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, or the Women's Royal Naval Service. They also served as mechanics, engineers, munitions workers, air raid wardens, and bus and fire engine drivers. Women also volunteered for the First Aid Nursing Yeomanry, Women's Voluntary Service, or served in civil defence, the National Fire Service, Air Transport Auxiliary, or military nursing. We must never forget the invaluable contributions and sacrifices made by women in the war efforts. Their roles, often behind the scenes, were pivotal in shaping the course of history. Behind the staggering troop numbers were individuals, each with a story, each with a family, each with fears and hopes, and each willing to risk it all for freedom. Bob Nobles of the 82nd Airborne. In the late-night darkness of June 5th, Bob Nobles and the rest of the men in the 508th 1st and 3rd Battalions strapped on their gear and weapons. They loaded onto a C-47 that belonged to the 9th Air Force's 313th Troop Carrier Group and roared off the tarmac shortly before midnight, heading for Normandy, along with hundreds of other planes. Nobles landed in a farmer's field all alone and immediately unhooked himself from his parachute. He then removed the reserve chute on his chest, which was blocking him from his rifle. He threw away his gas mask, correctly thinking he would never need it. Relieved of this equipment, he took off on foot until he came across another paratrooper. Arnold Raymond Ray Lambert. Ray Lambert, a 23-year-old medic in the 16th Infantry Regiment of the Army's 1st Division, the Big Red One, was part of the first assault wave at Omaha Beach. Lambert was wounded twice that morning, but was able to save well more than a dozen lives thanks to his bravery, skill, and presence of mind. Impelled by instinct, training, and a profound sense of responsibility for his men, he rescued many from drowning, bandaged many others, shielded wounded men behind the nearest steel barrier or lifeless body, and administered morphine shots, including one for himself to mask the pain of his own wounds. Those were just two examples of the countless acts of bravery and sacrifice that took place on D-Day. Each individual involved played a crucial role in this pivotal moment in history, and they should all be remembered. D-Day, or the Normandy landings on June 6, 1944, had a profound impact on the course of World War II. Here are some key points. D-Day marked a turning point in World War II. It was the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. The successful invasion opened a new front in Europe, relieving pressure on the Soviet Union in the east and diverting German resources from the Eastern Front.
Troops prepare to land. The beach is still empty, and the crossfire of German guns still rakes the shore.
Establishing a foothold. The D-Day invasion, also known as Operation Overlord, was the largest amphibious invasion in history. With the involvement of hundreds of thousands of troops from the United States, Britain, Canada, and other Allied nations, the landing on the beaches of Normandy was successful and established a crucial foothold in continental Europe for the Allies. This allowed them to begin a broad offensive against the German forces, pushing them back towards Germany. They pushed the Germans back from France, liberating Paris by August 1944.
The liberation of Paris was commemorated by the Allied Supreme Commander. Acting on behalf of the Allied forces, General Eisenhower presented the French capital with a shield of honor. The resting place of the French unknown soldier is restored. Once again, Frenchmen may honor their war dead at this famous shrine. The Supreme Commander's speech was a fitting tribute to the valiant French forces of the interior.
The invasion also allowed the Allies to secure vital ports, ensuring they could maintain supply lines for their advancing armies. The German army suffered a catastrophe greater than that of Stalingrad, the defeat in North Africa, or even the massive Soviet summer offensive of 1944. The invasion played a significant role in halting the genocidal policies of the Nazi regime. By liberating territories occupied by the Nazis, the Allies were able to halt the systematic extermination carried out in concentration and extermination camps. The success of D-Day boosted the morale of the Allied forces and solidified the alliances between the countries fighting against the Axis powers. The successful execution of D-Day put the Allies on a decisive path toward victory. Less than a year after the invasion, the Allies formally accepted Nazi Germany's surrender.
American troops destroy the Nazi Party emblem.
It's important to note that these achievements were not accomplished without tremendous sacrifice. While there are no official casualty numbers for D-Day, research efforts have led to the following estimates. From this research, there were about 1,465 American deaths, 3,184 wounded, 1,928 missing, and 26 captured. Of the total US figure, about 2,499 casualties were from the airborne troops. Germany is estimated to have lost anywhere between 4,000 and 9,000 men on D-Day. The British lost around 3,300 men. About 1,000 casualties were estimated on Gold Beach and Sword Beach, respectively. Additionally, there were about 1,200 casualties amongst the British airborne troops and about 100 glider pilots. Canada, lost just under 1,000 men. About 340 were killed, 574 were wounded, and 47 were taken prisoner. However, throughout the entire Battle of Normandy, over 550,000 Allied troops and German troops were killed, wounded, missing, or taken as prisoners. This includes over 230,000 Allied casualties. 135,000 were US ground troops, and 95,200 were 21st Army Group men, British, Canadian, and Polish ground forces. Germany had about 110,000 casualties who were killed or wounded, and about 210,000 who were captured as prisoners of war. The human cost of the war was staggering. Estimates of total deaths in World War II vary anywhere from 35 to 60 million. The heaviest proportionate human losses occurred in Eastern Europe, where Poland lost perhaps 20% of its pre-war population, and Yugoslavia and the Soviet Union lost around 10%. German losses, of which the greater proportion occurred on the Eastern Front, were only slightly less severe. The material cost of the war was also enormous. The money cost to the governments involved has been estimated at more than $1 trillion. This figure cannot represent the human misery, deprivation, suffering, the dislocation of people and of economic life, or the sheer physical destruction of property that the war involved. Adjusting for inflation, World War II cost over $17.3 trillion, according to the latest figures from the US inflation calculator. The war led to the destruction of infrastructure and economic resources, particularly in Europe. France estimated the total cost at an amount equivalent to 3 times the total French annual national income. In Great Britain, about 30% of the homes were destroyed or damaged. Agriculture in all the occupied countries suffered heavily from the destruction of facilities and farm animals, the lack of machinery and fertilizers, and the drain on manpower. These figures, while staggering, still cannot fully capture the true cost of the war, which brought untold suffering and loss to millions of people around the world. D-Day was more than a military operation. It was a testament to human courage and resilience. It was the day the tide turned in favor of freedom. And while we remember and honor the past, we look to the future with hope. A hope for a world where such sacrifices are no longer necessary. A hope for a world at peace. If you found this journey through history enlightening, please like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into our history. Together, we remember. Together, we learn.